About a year and a half ago, one of my viewers attempted a valve adjustment, and when he got to the part of the job where he had to position the crankshaft at the 1T position to inspect valve clearance for cylinder number 1, he found that every time he came close to the 1T position, the crankshaft would just slip right by. And he posted a video to show me the problem, and I'll put a link to the video in the description if you want to see it. And he tried a lot of different things apparently, but eventually he just gave up and put the bike back together and had a mechanic do the job. And apparently the mechanic had to get help to finish the job, but he didn't really say what he did to solve the problem. Well, about 6 months after that, I attempted a valve adjustment on my bike just because it needed it. And I found that I was starting to have that same problem. I had never had the problem before, but it was starting to get to the point where it was difficult to keep the crankshaft at that 1T position. It was moving out of position. I had to keep putting it back in. And so I started to worry that maybe my bike was getting to that point where maybe it was reaching the service limit. I've got 45,000 miles on my bike now, and maybe the engine is just starting to wear down. So, but I was able to adjust valve clearance. So then a year later, which brings us to about 2 weeks ago, I attempted another routine valve inspection. And whenever I got to the 1T position, it would just slip right by. So I was not able to position the crankshaft at the 1T position. So at that point, I had to either think about getting rid of the bike or figuring out how to, position the crankshaft. I wasn't sure if this was an indication that the engine was reaching its service limit or not. But I tried a few things, and what I did was I rotated the rear wheel because I wanted to put put the bike in 6th gear and try to use the rear wheel to maybe hold the crankshaft in place, or to at least make it more difficult for the crankshaft to rotate. So I wanted to put it in 6th gear, but the problem is you can't do that unless the bike is turned on. I'm not exactly sure what it is, some safety mechanism. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it, but the bike just doesn't shift gears unless it's turned on. And so what you have to do is you have to raise the rear wheel and rotate the wheel as you're trying to shift. And for some reason it goes into, it changes gear when the rear wheel is moving. So after doing that, the crankshaft still didn't really stay in place properly. It would still slip past the 1T position, but it was a little bit easier to keep it in the 1T position. And what I ended up doing, and you can see with this picture, is I tried to use a big socket wrench and just, kind of as I'm rotating and I get close to that 1T position, I would just change the direction of the socket wrench and let gravity hold the socket wrench there, and that would kind of ensure that it wouldn't slip by. So these are just a few things that you can try. And but anyway, long story short, doing those two things with the socket wrench and putting the bike in 6th gear, I was able to keep it in the 1T position. Now, I just want to mention something that the service manual points out that relates to this. If we go to general information, there's all this basic information that they provide at the beginning of the service manual. And if you get to this page here, it says direction of engine rotation. When rotating the crankshaft by hand, the free play amount of rotating direction will affect the adjustment. Rotate the crankshaft to positive direction clockwise viewed from output side. Now there's a lot about this that seems wrong. First of all, it says the basic principle I think they're talking about, and I did talk to a mechanic about this, but I didn't really completely understand what the point is, but it's talking about, it's the idea that if you let the socket wrench hang in the direction of opposite the direction of normal rotation, then and let gravity hang it there, then somehow the free play might affect something. Again, I don't know for sure, but it says the amount of rotating direction will affect the adjustment. What is the adjustment? Is that talking about a valve adjustment? Is that talking about adjusting the crankshaft when you install it? There's a million different things it could be talking about. So what is the adjustment? Also, it says rotate the crankshaft to positive direction. What is positive? Well, obviously that probably means in the direction of normal engine rotation, but again, that's an ambiguous word. And it says clockwise viewed from output side, and I assume that that hand right there, which is obviously on the right side of the engine, that is supposed to be the output side, but that's not the output side. I would assume that the output side would be on the left side of the bike. If you're sitting on the bike and you're looking forward, the left side of the bike would be the output side, because that's where the crankshaft connects to the counter sprocket, the front sprocket, and then it turns the drive chain, so on and so forth. So the output side should be on the left side of the bike, not the right side. So it's possible that this is maybe talking about a different bike, or maybe I'm just not understanding it. But there's a lot that I don't get about this whatever they're talking about here, and so, but I just thought I would mention this because it's talking about free play affecting some sort of an adjustment. Now, I don't think that it would really matter that you're hanging the wrench. I mean, I understand that there's some sort of free play involved, but that free play would be nowhere near what it would need to be in order to affect, the position of the cam lobes, so that you would inspect valve clearance, at least in my opinion. I don't see why that would make a difference, but I just thought that I would mention this just because I don't really know what it's talking about. So, take the information into account and do with it what you want. Another thing that you can possibly do, I considered doing, but I really didn't want to do, because it's kind of just a pain to have to do that. But another thing you can consider doing is taking the spark plugs out, and that might make it to where there's no pressure on the cylinders. I don't know if that would make the problem worse or make it better, but that's one thing you can try doing if you come across this problem. Now, yesterday I was at a dealership, and I was talking to a guy there that really seemed knowledgeable about performing work on bikes, and I asked him about it. I said, is that an indication that the engine is reaching its service limit? And he said that brand new engines will do that. So apparently it's just something that mechanics have to deal with. Sometimes it's just difficult to position the crankshaft. And so I asked him, well, what do you do when that happens? And he said to do the exact same things that I had thought about, and that is, put the bike in sixth gear, try to hold the wheel. I don't know if holding the wheel would, I'm not exactly sure how you would do it, but basically you just want to figure out ways to keep that crankshaft in that position. And putting it in sixth gear will make it more difficult. It won't completely solve the problem, but it'll make it more difficult for the crankshaft to move. And he also said, try taking the spark plugs out. So long story short, if you come across this problem, don't panic. That's apparently a problem that a lot of mechanics experience, and just try some different things to fix the problem. But don't be alarmed. It's a typical problem apparently that people face, and if these solutions or methods that I've talked about, if they don't work, there's got to be some way to do it. So if you face this problem, don't give up. Just try, whatever you can do to keep that crankshaft in that position, and don't be worried if you come across this problem, because it is apparently a common problem.